Good evening. Welcome to Broomfield 101 Public Forum on Economic Vitality and Development. My name is Lynn Merwin, and I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development. I'm here this evening with my colleague Jeff Romine, our economist and Director of Development Finance. Next slide, please. My portion of the presentation will focus on development review in Broomfield, including providing a background on the visionary and regulatory framework we work within, highlighting key opportunities for public engagement and influence, as well as providing a high-level overview of our multi-year effort to modernize our development code and processes. Jeff, in turn, will address balancing development, the big picture, trends, along with an update on our catalytic projects. Next slide, please. Focusing first on development review, much of Broomfield's new development will typically work with the Community Development Department. Collectively, we're responsible for the day-to-day development-related efforts throughout Broomfield, whether a homeowner is proposing to add an accessory dwelling unit, a small business is proposing to locate in a new part of town, or a private developer is proposing a new apartment building or multi-use development. The Community Development Department includes 4 key divisions: the Buildings Division, which reviews permits and plans for new buildings, building additions and remodels for safety and compliance with applicable building codes; the Engineering Division, which reviews permits and plans for what we call horizontal infrastructure, which includes roads, drainage ways, floodplains, stormwater improvements, and underground utilities to ensure compliance with engineering standards, and which are also focused on ensuring safety for the community. The Planning Division reviews new and amended zoning requests, new residential, commercial, and mixed-use developments, the creation or change to the legal boundaries of a property, also known as subdividing or replatting, and even smaller scale improvements like decks and pergolas. Our Capital Improvements Program Division serves as Broomfield's developer of city and county projects. They're responsible for constructing new facilities like the rebuild of the Broomfield Community Center a couple of years ago, modernizing facilities as is currently underway at the Bay, and building and updating roads, utilities, parks, and trails. Collectively, we collaborate extensively with other city and county departments, as well as a wide variety of external agencies, such as the Colorado Department of Transportation, the Fire District, utility companies, the Flood District, school districts, and adjacent cities and counties. Next slide, please. The Community Development Department works within both a policy and a regulatory framework. Our key vision plans include the Comprehensive Plan, which is the overarching vision plan for Broomfield. This plan is updated in collaboration with the community approximately every decade. Examples of functional plans, also guiding documents, include the Transportation Plan and the Open Space Parks, Recreation, and Trails Plan. We also have various neighborhood and area plans for parts of the community that require a finer grain of planning unique to that specific area. In terms of our key regulatory requirements, we rely on the Broomfield Municipal Code, building codes, and engineering standards. And there may also be other local, state, and federal requirements that apply depending on the project type and the location. Next slide, please. The next series of slides focus on opportunities for public engagement prior to and within the formal development review process. There are 4 key steps along the way in the process, and we'll go over the key places that provide an opportunity for residents and other interested parties to learn more and provide input if desired. By participating during one or more of these stages, you can make your voice heard on projects that may impact your day-to-day life in our community. The first stop for public engagement is the neighborhood meeting, highlighted in blue on the left side of the graphic. This is a meeting developers are required to host prior to submitting a formal application for development review. The intent is to provide an opportunity early on to learn about the planned project directly from the applicant, to ask questions, and to provide input prior to application. One key point I would like to emphasize is that this step applies to new development requiring a public hearing down the line after formal application. It does not apply to new proposals with zoning that allows that new development to proceed directly to permit approval. So examples of projects that would not require a neighborhood meeting could include new buildings or single new building, decks, fences, and new business signs. When those applications demonstrate they can meet specific code requirements, they can be approved without a hearing or without a neighborhood meeting. Next slide, please. In this slide, we highlight in blue the concept review application as another step offering an opportunity for public engagement. This applies to many new development types as well. For concept review applications, the Land Use Review Commission and City Council are the key reviewers, and the neighboring property owners are invited to participate and provide input. While this step requires an application to Broomfield, it occurs prior to that formal development application. For concept reviews, the applicant receives feedback, but there's no formal action taken. We have two types of concept reviews. One is an in-person public meeting before City Council, and the other is held as a virtual review on the project's Broomfield Voice page for a 30-day period. There may be an in-person public meeting for some concept reviews, particularly if the application involves a rezoning or other key amendments or variances for the property, whereas smaller projects that are compliant with all the existing regulations could have an online concept review. And just a little background on the Broomfield Voice. The Broomfield Voice is Broomfield's primary online resource for public engagement. Many Broomfield-sponsored and private developer-sponsored applications will have a dedicated project webpage on the Broomfield Voice platform where the community can learn more and ask questions. Broomfield and the developer collectively provide notifications to the public, which include a sign posting in advance on the property, mailed notice to property owners within 1,000 feet of the proposed development site, and the Broomfield Voice page providing an overview of the project and a place to ask questions and learn more. Next slide, please. Once the concept review is completed, if required, and the applicant has submitted a formal application, there are opportunities for the community to engage through, again, the Broomfield Voice page during the development review stage, again shown in blue on the top of the screen, and at one or more public hearings regarding the proposal, again shown in blue in this graphic. And this is where the public is invited to provide comments. I would note that Broomfield has 3 quasi-judicial bodies that hold public hearings. These include the Neighborhood Board of Adjustments, which considers variances from a specific requirement such as a reduced setback for a new building addition, the Land Use Review Commission, and City Council, who both consider a broad range of formal applications for new or amended developments. For smaller land use actions covering 7 acres or less, the application may be eligible for consideration and final decision by the Land Use Review Commission, subject to council opting to call the case up for a second hearing. Other larger and more complex projects will require hearings before LERC and City Council, with the City Council making that final decision. Next slide, please. To summarize, if you'd like to learn more, ask questions, or provide comments, we invite you to attend a meeting or a public hearing, submit written comments on any planning project to planning@broomfield.org, or visit the planning webpage to learn more. And here you'll find tabs to connect you to the Broomfield Voice project pages, and also a tab to connect you to the current projects map, which provides high-level summary of projects by location. Next slide, please. In this next series of slides, I will shift to a brief overview of how Broomfield has undertaken a multi-year effort to update and modernize our land use codes to reflect best practices, compliance with new state laws rolling out annually, support for Broomfield's community goals related to growing greener, improving mobility, and promoting a thriving, diverse, safe, and welcoming community. In 2020 and 2022, Council approved new and updated requirements related to affordable housing, also referred to as inclusionary housing. These code amendments included a requirement that developers provide a certain percentage of their units as affordable. It also allowed for fee reductions for developments with inclusionary housing. In 2020, 2021, and 2024, Council approved a series of code amendments that have strengthened opportunities for public engagement, some of which I have described earlier, such as requiring neighborhood meetings. Next slide, please. Council also adopted new codes regarding a major sign code update, a new landscape and waterwise code, new and updated parking regulations, including requiring bicycle parking and electric vehicle parking, various building and energy code updates, and we also repealed out-of-date ordinances where applicable. Next slide. Last year, Council approved modernized zoning districts for open space, public facilities, and for parks, recreation, and open lands. They also adopted 3 new zone districts for TOD and mixed-use developments earlier this year. Part of the intent behind some of these newer development districts is to provide greater transparency about what is permitted on a given property with a specific zoning. If applied to a property, the new districts also make it a little easier or a little less burdensome for developers seeking to provide new residential development, which supports the community goal of providing a diverse and welcoming community. And coming up later this year for council consideration, we will be proposing a new tree preservation ordinance. Next slide. Another key focus of our development work this past year, and which we will see increasing focus in the next few years ahead, relate to code updates we need to make to comply with new state laws. This year, we approved an ordinance allowing large family childcare homes as a home occupation, again, because it's required by state law. And before year's end, we anticipate an update to the residential occupancy requirements to remove limitations related to familial relationships among residents in a home. Looking ahead, we anticipate a new expedited review process for eligible inclusionary housing developments related to Proposition 123 approved by the voters. New requirements related to transit communities, and that bill was HB 241313, which is to promote density and new housing near transit stations. And then as we will also anticipate an update to our accessory dwelling unit regulations. Next slide. With regard to our long-range planning, we're in the early phases of undertaking studies and planning for major updates to the 2016 Comprehensive Plan, the 2016 Transportation Plan, the 1999 I-25 Subarea Plan. We also anticipate preparing a historic preservation plan, considering a construction waste management study, drafting a public land dedication ordinance, and other updates as required by law or as directed by City Council. So in conclusion, for this first part of the presentation, I'm wrapping up. I would say that your community development department is working in collaboration with other departments and agencies, and we're busy working to update our codes where required by law, to modernize our development requirements, to streamline some of the development review processes where feasible and provide greater transparency regarding land use, and last but not least, to ensure opportunities for transparency about new developments and inviting public engagement. Overall, we're striving to meet key community goals I mentioned earlier in this presentation regarding growing greener, improving mobility such as traffic, transportation, trails, and bicycle infrastructure, and promoting a thriving, diverse, safe, and welcoming community. And with this, I will turn over the next half to my esteemed colleague, Jeff Romine.
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Jeff Romine. I'm the Director of Economic Vitality. As Lynn also referenced, I'm the Director of Development Finance. So in those two roles, one of the things I do is work very closely with Lynn and everyone else in the planning department and other departments within the city and county of Broomfield. She talks about transparency. One of the key things that when I think about transparency in the work that I do is the reliability and the knowledge. So when a developer or someone's thinking about growing their business or locating and creating a development, they want to know what the rules are, and they want to be able to count on those rules. And so that's when we talk about, when Lynn mentions transparency, to some degree, that's what we're talking about. So it's both transparency to the resident as well as to the development community. So moving forward, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about development within our community and what we see coming. This is something, again, that we work hand in hand with many people within both the city and county of Broomfield, but across the community and with our private and public sector partners. This is really focused on 2 of the city council and community's 6 goals, is where we spend an awful lot of our time. And that is goal number 1, which is financial sustainability and resiliency. And then the second one is creating a thriving, diverse, and safe, welcoming community. You'll hear me talk about both sides of that, so that's both about generating and ensuring that we can pay our bills, but frankly create the resources that city council and the community needs in order to achieve the vision and goals of the community. And secondly, to create a community where people feel really comfortable living, working, and growing their families or creating opportunities for themselves. And not just today, but actually looking forward a number of years. And that's been a hallmark of this community for most of that time. We have a number of metrics when we measure these goals, and two that I just wanted to point out today. One of them is the jobs housing balance. This really talks about how we are creating a balanced community. And the goal here is to stay at that 1.25 range of jobs to housing. And what we're doing there is ensuring that the sales tax is being generated, the property tax is being made balanced, but also that everyone can feel really comfortable with the types of activities that are going on with this community. This separates Broomfield from many other suburban communities and is much more aligned with what you see in central cities with that kind of ratio. So this is a really significant part of what this community has been about in the foundations of the community. And you can see the numbers. I'm not going to go through it. And then you can also see how we compare to the metro area as a whole. And as you can see, that's been moving positively toward where we are, but we still tend to stay just above the metro area from that standpoint, from job creation and other things. Next slide, please. This slide shows one of the other metrics that we oftentimes focus on, and that is the general fund, as we talked about last week in the Finance and Economic 101. We think about sales tax, we think about property tax. One of the greatest issues that's oftentimes facing the community is the generation of property tax. And that just doesn't affect the city and county of Broomfield because counties are primarily funded through those types of activities and that tax revenue, but also affects our school districts as well as other special districts. And so this just is showing you what that relationship is between the assessed valuation of those two sources. That's not market valuation. That is the assessed valuation, because that's how the taxes are applied, is upon assessed valuation. So the example in Colorado historically has been that if you have $1 million commercial property, historically it was assessed at 29%. Now it's roughly at about 27.9%. So we can all do the math still in our head. That means that the assessed valuation of that $1 million property would be at $270,900 right now. And then the mills are applied both for the school districts and others. On the residential side, it's a different formula, same kind of model, but you can see how that balance has been sitting, and you can see that it's fluctuated a little bit in the most recent years. We have seen both escalation in commercial property values, but a more quick rising on the residential side over the last 4 years. And so that's what's thrown it off a little bit, but that's always been kind of the hallmark of both Colorado and Broomfield. And we'll continue to watch that because that does represent that fiscal balance that we oftentimes talk about. Next slide, please. Moving on to land use types, Lynn spent time talking about the process, but equally important, or actually even more important, I would say, than the process is what types of development are we looking for? This shows you an approach that we brought forward roughly 4 years ago. It was something that people from multiple departments all had a voice in, and we began to think about that what may develop in one part of Broomfield or be desired in one part of Broomfield isn't consistent with what might be desired or wanted in another part of Broomfield. And so we created this simple little metric or kind of typology, for lack of better, showing that those different things could be happening in different parts of the community. So we're not trying to be one size fits all. That's exactly the opposite of the way Broomfield is developed. What we're trying to say is what may be needed in one part of the community may not be needed in a different part. And so as you can see, those are the 8 typologies we came forward with and talked to City Council about and have shared within the development community. And so they range all the way from what we call the Metro Economic Center, which is very similar to what we're seeing over on the very far west side of the community in the interlocking area, and we will be seeing going forward in the baseline area up in the northeast part, all the way down to what we would call neighborhood convenience, which is really very much a residential neighborhood with a little bit of walkabout convenience. To be able to go get something, perhaps a cup of coffee, or your insurance agent is nearby, or whatever. So it's that type of range, and we're very cognizant of how those fit together to create the type of community and the character that is wanted. So this isn't so much like there is a specific rule to it. It really is giving the opportunity for developers to kind of tell us and begin a conversation with us so that we can make sure that it fits and supports what the community has indicated that they want. So referencing back to Lynn Merwin's example about the neighborhood meetings. That's where we talk about it in a very unique setting, but this way, before we get to that, we can kind of explain what we think that the community is looking for and what the neighbors would be looking for. Moving on then to the next slide, we wanted to give you an update of what is actually happening here in Broomfield right now and what we see in the next couple years. And so what you end up seeing is the various flex and light industrial is oftentimes what it's also referred to, but the flex innovation space that we see coming forward in Broomfield both now and what is leading our development right now in the commercial side over the next 2 to 5 years. And you can see the list of projects. They range across the community and they range in size, all the way from things that are 500,000 or even 1 million square feet in development size, all the way down to 33,000 square feet at Depot Hill, just off 287 on the central side of Broomfield, just slightly to the west of here. At the same time, though, we also see redevelopment. So those oftentimes are new infill sites or new greenfield sites. But at the same time, we see redevelopment and reuse. As Lynn mentioned, we think about that reuse, the mixed use, those types of things. Those are some of the new plans and new approaches and regulations that we're bringing forward to create that reliability for developers to bring something like this and to figure out how to fit something in where there was something former. The greatest example on this list, of course, is the 120th Reinvestment and Development. That's being led by a number of different types of developments. So 120th historically has been a 1970s highway commercial district. Very much pad sites, fast food, the grocery stores and other things that are located on there, all really important to part of the community, and those are great services and businesses. But at the same time, what we see both here in this part of the metro area, but across the country, an infill of those great locations with a more dense and oftentimes mixed use, so bringing residential in. The key project, and we're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes, is Broomfield Town Square and bringing that forward, that mixed use and that increased density. Another example would be the former Sandos and Mile High Labs building. While we don't expect it to change in significant use, we do expect that building to change. It has just recently changed hands, and so we are already in a conversation with them of what they're thinking about bringing forward and what types of uses. Next slide, please. So it's a little difficult to see, but this is a graph that we have shared at various times. And it really, if you look at it closely, and there are copies of the presentation in the back of the room if you want to see it, it's a purple at the bottom and a blue on top. And really what it represents is the relationship between how we're seeing residential development coming into the community over the last almost 20 years now. And so it's looking at multifamily, which is in the dark blue, always on the top part of each of these bars, and then the single family. And what you'll notice is if you look to the left side, my left side, but the left side of the graph, you'll see that much, even in the 2000s and coming into to roughly about 2020, you will see a predominance, generally speaking, except for 2012, but you see a predominance of primarily single family through that period, with an equal mix of multifamily. But as you look at the years since roughly 2020, what you'll see is a heavy development orientation toward multifamily. That is also, if you look at it geographically, what we've seen is that's the concentration and the infill of residential into the western side of the community, so along US 36. That's both where the market has indicated, but also it's creating a mix of housing types within our community. And that's critically important. So when we think about mixes of housing, we are not just focused on income levels, but also type of housing. Because oftentimes what we see from the data is we have 1 or 2 person households moving to Broomfield soon after college or grad school, or as they set up their business or their careers, and then oftentimes finding their life partner, and then sometimes even having children here. And so having all single-family homes and detached single-family homes isn't necessarily matching with what's coming into the community. And so this is a recognition of the evolution of our community, and both the infill in a general sense, but also infill specifically to geography. And we expect that pattern to continue. The one thing that we are now starting to pay much more attention to, which is a subgroup of these, and that is thinking about the medium density, what we would call for sale homes. And so those are the row homes or townhomes. They're oftentimes 2 or 3 stories, and there'll be 9 to 12 on a particular foundation. And so it's different than the apartment buildings many normally think of when we think of multifamily, with 40 or 50 or 100 units in a group of buildings, or the single-family home. This is that middle level. The reason why we're highly attuned to that and encouraging that is it both increases the density, therefore uses our infrastructure, and creates that outcome that businesses and new homeowners are looking for, but it also becomes somewhat more affordable. Single-family homes with their traditional yards are very expensive in comparison to a row home or a townhome. Next slide, please. Speaking of housing and speaking of the range of housing, so this is both for sale and rentals, you'll notice, but this is what we refer to as income-aligned housing, income-aligned residential. So for us here in Broomfield, that means families making 120% of AMI or below. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about income-aligned. We used to use the word, and historically many people have used the word affordable. I jokingly will say, I'm not sure too much is affordable anymore in the housing markets here in Colorado, and especially within the Front Range. But nevertheless, this is trying to align the rental or sale prices to the types of residents and the incomes of those residents. So we have 3 projects that are focused at 100% AMI or below, generally at 80% AMI, 2 that are specifically already under construction in some parts, and then 2 more that are moving forward now through the planning process and nearing the end of the planning process. So far enough along that we feel very comfortable talking about them. So those would be the 4 for sale projects. At the same time, there's lots of market rate housing being developed across our community. So this is just that subsegment of it, but it just represents what that's looking like. And our goal of trying to help first-time home buyers and other folks establish themselves in our community and start putting down the roots, because that's critically important to our community's success and also really part of our history. This is the place that was an affordable alternative to other communities in this area, primarily Boulder. And so that strength of this community is always in the background in our thinking and recognizing that's how this community got developed and built. On the rental side, you can see the list of projects that are coming forward. All of these have moved through to a point that we're very comfortable sharing them, and they'll be under construction, in some cases already under construction, but under construction in the very near future, and probably will be opening within the next roughly 2 years to 3 years at most for almost all of these projects. And then also, we'd like to talk about the fact that we have not been sitting in our hands, and this is just not how are we going to go forward, but we have made some accomplishments over the last 2 years, and that is Northwest Apartments on the near northeast or northwest side, and Crosswinds, which is at Arista on the southwest side. Both of those are now opened and are fully occupied at this point. Next slide, please. I should mention that the part of the reason for looking for income-aligned housing is also to support our businesses and recognizing that one of the complaint I oftentimes, or not complaint, but the comment I hear most from our businesses is we're not sure we can recruit very easily because oftentimes our employees can't live near work. And so what we're trying to do is help solve part of that problem by providing this type of housing and encouraging the private sector to do this. In some cases, we do provide support for these developments, but in many cases, they're doing it because it's part of what they see as important, and it is something that we've required, as being mentioned in the inclusionary housing ordinance that exists in Broomfield. Pausing just for a second, because we're going to switch directions just a little bit. The other part of the work that I do with my colleagues and with everyone here in Broomfield, including several people on what we call the Matrix team who are in the room, this is a team of individuals that are brought together by the city county manager from 5 different departments where we get together and work on bringing forward some key developments that have been talked about in this community for, in some cases, more than a decade. Our task is to make them happen. It's great to talk about things. It's great to have great vision, but until it becomes a reality, it's not real. And that's our goal as this team, this matrix team of individuals from across different departments, and we feel very good with the progress we've made, and we hope that in several cases, a couple of these are about to break ground. One of them actually breaks ground next Tuesday, if I remember my dates right, on September 3rd. And so I'll talk about these briefly. This gives you an overview of the three primary catalytic projects, as we refer to them, and these are just the first phases. I updated this slide on Monday just to make sure I had all the most up-to-date information for each of those developments, because they have adjusted on what is phase one versus what may be coming in a future phase. Again, this goal of the matrix team, this goal of when we talk about catalytic projects is what is coming, what is real. Let's not talk about 20 years from now or 30 years from now. Let's talk about what we can deliver in the next few years. And that's really, as you can see, if you go down about midway down in this slide, you'll see, when does horizontal construction start? And horizontal construction, as Lynn indicated in her presentation, is another way of saying when they go into the ground and they start digging and they start putting in infrastructure, i.e. roads, pipes, and other things. And so that's the first step in any development, and then the vertical build is right behind it, as you can see on the slide. So I provided those for you so you can see that. You can also see the types of support that we're providing. I would note here on that last line, Broomfield support. That means it's the revenue that will be generated from the development in the future. So when it says 50% or 25% or whatever, we're talking about those revenues that will be coming in to the city and what it's taking for us to support those developments. In all cases, though, you'll note that those are less than 50% of the tax revenue. So in effect, we are always getting more than we're giving in order to encourage these developments, but nevertheless, in the environment that we're in, we have to do some of that in order to encourage certain developments. And you can see they vary across project, in part because of the costs of the infrastructure and some of the other things related to these developments. I will go through, next slide please. I'm just going to run through each of the four just so that you can see what we're talking about. They're in alphabetical order, not geographic order. So this is in Northeast Broomfield. On the far right side, you can see the picture of what baseline is as a whole. So that's the entire development area. That will eventually include up to 9,000 plus housing units and up to about 6 million square feet of commercial space. However, the key point of phase one that we're really talking about right now, because some of the developments already occurred, but the next phase of what's coming is a place called Center Street District, and this is a picture of what part of phase one would be. It's the picture of the entire Center Street area. The phase one is roughly 2/3 to the east of the development. So it's not those two large buildings off to the left side of your slide, but in fact, it's the development to the right. And as you can see underneath in the bullet points, it's roughly 300,000 square feet of commercial, roughly 500 housing units that will be occurring within that area. And you can see some of the other bullet points within the slide. It builds into the amenity system, so there'll be plazas and other areas within that geographic area. And then just to the southeast of that site, to your right and to the bottom, there's a large park area and connects into the trail areas. That's part of baseline and then into Broomfield. Again, here's the construction phases that we're into right now. So they're finishing some of the green space and trails. They'll be occurring, as I mentioned, to the southeast. Then there'll be the horizontal and infrastructure plans in the beginning of the work in 2025. The goal is to move the vertical forward in 2026 with business openings in late 2027, early 2028. I would note in all of these, when you see dates that are here and when they're coming, that is not staff, that is not city council, that is not Broomfield at all. That is what the developers are telling us they can achieve. They are the ones providing those timelines. We are not generating timelines on behalf of others. And so if the expectation is if you say you can do it, we're going to believe you. And we're going to hold your feet to the fire, and we are going to make sure that those things happen as you have said you're going to do. That is part of our work. Obviously, markets get in the way of that a little bit, and those things they need to make sure. But we're trying to Let them say what they can do, not put words into their mouth or put unrealistic expectations out there. Next slide, please. Broomfield Town Square, which is immediately to the south of the city building, as well as just to the west of where the library is, on the north side of 120th. You can see the site map to the bottom left side of this slide. You can see what the renderings that they have provided to us and what it will look like. So generally speaking, this will be some two-story buildings, but which is primarily the former Safeway store is a taller building. Generally, you'd say it's roughly 2 stories. It's a single-story building, but it's got very high ceilings. On the north side of First, there will be larger residential buildings with first-floor retail and restaurants, and those will be more in the 4 to 5 story range. And so exactly how they line up and how they fit in will vary by each building, but it gives you some sense of the scale and what will be coming there. As you can see, it's 63,600 square feet of commercial, of a mix, primarily retail and restaurant is what they're telling us. It'll be close to 6,000 square feet of restaurant and retail, but there is some additional light office and some others in there. You can see it'll be 491 housing units. These are expected to be all rental, with the exclusion of 12 townhomes. I'm looking at Lynn because she always remembers these numbers better than I. 12 townhomes that will be along Main Street on the east side of Main Street. And then, as you can see, there'll be a swimmable lake. There'll be 4 acres with a beach and boathouse. And there'll be a large plaza area that will be at the tip of that lake, and that will be the transition into where the former Safeway is. Again, you can see the calendar of the schedule. Next slide, please. Flatirons Crossing redevelopment. This is the area, so 2 things are going on there. So I'm always leery to say redevelopment, so I oftentimes, and you'll notice on this slide, it's called reinvestment. Because the mall, which is 1.2 million square feet of space, is not going away. It is being reinvested in. They're right now put in new escalators, they're revamping the tenant mix and moving tenants around. They're bringing additional tenants in, as you may have noted. And just doing an incredible job of reinvesting in that facility and that great draw into our community. That is the real reason why we're in this project, to be honest with you. It was to ensure that malls stay very strong and be reinvested in. Malls generally have a lifespan of roughly 20 years in this day and age, and sometimes not even that long, honestly. This is the 3rd strongest mall in the metropolitan area. And it's very successful historically. And so what we wanted to encourage Macerich, which is the owner of the mall and the operator of the mall, to do was ensure that there's a reinvestment. So Macy's have reinvested in their store. Others have reinvested in theirs. And so we're seeing that real strengthening of that marketplace within our community. At the same time, though, they are literally tearing down. They tore down a number of buildings to the southwest of the existing mall, in between the AMC Theater and the mall itself. And that's what's going on with the redevelopment, as you can see in the picture to the upper right corner of this slide. In this particular case, they'll bring somewhere between 600 to 700 residential units. 20% of them will be income aligned or affordable. There'll be some new office space that will be built there, a new parking garage that will be built there to replace the land that was being used for parking in order to create this urban village. And so you can see the timeline of it and what's going on both within that new village area as well as the Flatirons Crossing Mall itself. So it gives you a sense, and as I mentioned, they will be starting construction on Tuesday. So that is great news, and they're moving forward rapidly with that. They will likely pause some of the work as we get into the holiday season, because you can imagine the Christmas season, the holiday season is important, so they'll pause some of that work, and then they expect to be starting vertical construction in early 2025. So that's that. Next slide, please. While we haven't explicitly started calling it a catalytic project yet, for the past year plus, it sure seems like it's been a catalytic project, at least for I and a number of other of my colleagues. And so the first decision that Broomfield Urban Renewal Authority, and the City Council needed to make was what was the future. And as you've read all about it, the decision was made by those two groups to shut down the facility on November 30th, 2023. That was done with the recognition that the operator was honestly not performing at the levels that we had hoped, and we did not see an opportunity for it to move forward. They had 1 year left on their agreement with us, and they had indicated that it was unlikely they were going to renew. And we worked diligently to try to find other alternative uses or other people that might be interested, and we just didn't see it. So the decision was, as much as we didn't want to do it, and it was something that I'm sure City Council members individually had to anguish about and think through, but nevertheless, the decision was made for all the right reasons and for all the things that you have to do sometimes. This is one of those that you're really focusing on tomorrow as opposed to yesterday. And so they decided that we would close it on November 30th, at which point it went dark. We, last night at City Council, presented the approaches for the demolition of the facility, and the Borough Board came to the conclusion, without it, we didn't have a vote because we'll be having a vote shortly, but they came and gave us the direction of how we should demolish the building and move forward on it. So we'll be bringing that forward to City Council and Borough in September, late September, for the actual actions on that, but that is the direction we're going. In addition to that, we will be moving forward on an RFP to identify and seek a private developer who will purchase the property from Borough and the City and County of Broomfield, because there's two parcels. In order to bring a full development forward, we're looking for mixed-use development, so it will include some residential. However, it will be not predominantly residential. It'll be primarily commercial. The reason for that is going all the way back to the first things I started with, which was goal number one, financial sustainability and resiliency. So as we look at what we're going to bring forward on that site, that's going to be a primary condition and method for which we evaluate the various proposals we get. Again, that would be a private development. We will have some influence on it because we are still the current landowner, but we will be selling the land, what's referred to in the real estate markets as fee simple, which means we'll be out of the ownership of the property. We will still maintain oversight and control as that's going through the development process, through the processes that Lynn talked about. And so it will be a partnership, but it will not be a fiscal partnership. The fiscal partnership will be you pay your taxes, we collect the taxes, and we spend the money on the things that City Council authorizes us to. So that's the partnership that works best for many of us, and it makes the most sense. Cities oftentimes aren't great developers, and the decision was this is an opportunity, and this is a unique site along US 36 that we should be able to attract a very strong developer, and we can be smart about it and not be the owner of the buildings going forward. Next slide, please. So what's next? This just gives you, if you were here for the, or watched the financial and economic update that we gave, the 101 last week, you'll note that a couple of things that I mentioned there. Developers work 2 to 3 years out, so we are already seeing a re-engagement after the high interest rates because they believe interest rates will be coming down in the near future. Every indication suggests they will. So developers are actually starting to knock on our doors, engage in very meaningful conversations, reopening the projects that they had perhaps paused on in order to think through where they want to be in 2 to 3 years. Market conditions are improving, as I mentioned. Our work is very much about, I like to talk about our work as twofold on my side of the efforts, and that is both to help build the buildings but also fill the buildings. So we try to do both those things, and so getting the right kinds of spaces is critically important, and that's where the relationship exists with all my colleagues within the city is let's get space that people want. Let's get the types of things that businesses are looking for, and let's bring in the right kind of businesses that match up with our values and our vision. We've engaged and started a study of the interlocking area, so really this is greater than the interlocking area. It's effectively everything west of US 36. which I should say is south of US 36, because those of you who are highway buffs will know that even numbered US highways run east-west, and so therefore, just because we have a slight angle here, it's actually an east-west highway, so therefore it's either north or south side of the highway. So the south side of US 36, if I'm being precise. But we'll be looking at what's happening with the office market, what's happening with the commercial markets. And so that work will be coming forward. We'll be bringing that for conversations with City Council in 2025. You can see the list of what is causing changes. And I would say all the evidence I have, both from this area and this marketplace in the Denver metro area, but from across the country, what we are seeing around hybrid work, what we're seeing about people going in 2-3 times a week, that's here to stay. And that's a different reality than what we saw in the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, the 2010s. So we need to pivot to the market, and we need to understand what it is. We need to understand what those fiscal impacts are and those economic impacts are. You can see the list of types of commercial that we're seeing demand for. I used to get, when I would brief City Council on the economy roughly 3 to 4 years ago, I'd always get a question either from a City Council member or somebody in the public saying, why are you talking about retail? Retail's dead. Nobody's ever going to go into a mall again. Nobody's ever going to go into a store again. We're all going to do it online. The hottest market in commercial real estate right now is retail. And so it's an interesting side that everything is cyclical in some ways. You pay attention to where the patterns and the changes are going, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the world has come to a crashing halt. It just means it's evolving. So we continue to expect remote work. We continue to expect to see online purchases. However, how that lands and how that falls out, there'll always be a balance. And you're seeing a number of online retailers. Most recently, you see Amazon, you see Google, you see all kinds of online retail stores all opening up bricks and mortar stores, because you have to be complete and you have to be serving your customers. This, I promise, is my last slide. So what else is next on the residential side? Both because of state regulation, also because of some of the things that the community is doing in the leadership role, but equally there is what's the market demanding. So we're seeing an increased diversification, as I already mentioned, in the housing options, both on price as well as type. We're seeing smaller lots for single family, in part because people are busy and they don't want to spend all day Saturday working on their acre lots. So you're seeing a lot smaller lots. You're also seeing the surge in environmentalism and wanting to have green, but not needing a large amount of green, and recognizing that we are in a high plains desert here, and that water's at a premium. So how we bring all those together is, in the residential side, is smaller lots, higher density than what we've seen in the past. It also, by doing that, creates some attainability in the pricing. The multifamily homes, I've already talked about that. Everybody likes to ask the question of, why don't we see condos? You go to Chicago, you go to New York, and you hear about condos, or San Francisco. The reality is we have a very interesting construction defects law and the way that it's put in place and some of those things. And it's basically had an incredible chilling effect on condo development, which is for sale apartments, is another way of saying what condos are. And that has been in place, and it is quieted this market and basically made it non-existent unless you're building something at $1 million plus per unit here in Colorado, and that's all across the metropolitan area. So we just don't see condo developments occurring and won't. We want it. We think it's really important because it's a great opportunity for first-time home buyers in other markets, but unfortunately, certain laws within Colorado are preventing that. The legislature annually talks about it, and so there's an acute awareness in both parties about this issue, but at this point they haven't come forward with a solution that has really worked. Lot splitting and accessory dwelling. We continue to encourage accessory dwelling within our community. It's difficult. Accessory dwelling units tend to work best where there's, quite frankly, smaller lots, on-street parking, and alleys, because it creates different access and different options. But it's something that we think will be evolving and coming forward more in the future. And then finally, I just want to end with these two words, infill and redevelopment. Broomfield from the 1960s and 70s was always a place of greenfield development until roughly about 10 years ago. And then the most major redevelopment occurred, which was the closing down of what's still referred to by many people as the Flatirons Marketplace, which was a big box center. And so when that kind of went away, then we began the first real effort on redevelopment within this community. One of those buildings is already up with 300 plus housing units in it. Another one is getting ready to start construction in the near future, now that interest rates are starting to fall. So at that, those are where we see the trends. I want to conclude then with a commercial, if I could. Next slide, please. And the commercial is not to come spend money at Jeff's, whatever. The commercial is, we have several more public events, 3 more of these 101s. They're on Wednesday nights generally, so on the 4th, 11th, and then the 25th, you'll see the 101s. That's transportation is next, then an election forum, and then public safety forum. At the same time, we have 2 more sessions related to the utility enterprise funds, which is a topic that council is definitely digging deep into and having conversations about. There's a workshop on September 5th, which would be a Thursday night, and then there's the City Council study session on the 17th, which is a Tuesday night. All those meetings will be held here. Please attend those or watch the tapings of these, or watch the sessions if they're live, such as the study session. This is a great opportunity to learn about how this community develops and how we bring all of this together. So at that, next slide, please. Anna's here in the back. She has a microphone. So we are taping this for people to be able to watch at their leisure. So if there's any questions, please, Anna will bring you a microphone, and please state your question. We do have 2 questions also submitted. So I'll start with those 2 questions while we're deciding who to hand the microphone to. First question is, in the catalytic zones, in the catalytic areas, is there room for the city to consider more local business and entrepreneurship development? And how are you engaging residents to build those pipelines? So the community meetings that Lynn talked about, almost all of them, there's been several of them related to each of these catalytic developments. And I can't even guess the number of conversations this community's had around Broomfield Town Square. I'm guessing it's far more than 1 hand, and maybe even more than 2 hands. Oh, she's doing 2 sets of hands, so at least 20. So that's how we're engaging with the residents about what is coming. Within the conditions of our agreement with the Broomfield Town Square developer, they are talking and pledging to bring unique, interesting retail and restaurants. They have explicitly talked about not wanting to bring national chains into that development, so they want to bring in those one-off types. They could be 3 other locations somewhere else in the metropolitan area or in Colorado. This would be the 4th, or it could be the 1st in Market. And so those are the types of things, and we have a specific language in our agreement there. In talking to the developers of the other 2 catalytic sites, in both cases, they are also trying to bring it. What they have recognized and what they've pledged to do is not bring cookie cutter to us. And so in each case, they know the success of those developments in order to bring in customers and patrons and people interested in it from not just from Broomfield, but from across the region, is to bring something unique and fun and innovative into the marketplace. And so in all 3 cases, it's something that we, the staff, talk to them about, and it's something they have pledged publicly to the city council and our community. So that answers the first question. On the second question, related to Broomfield Town Square, it appears there's been no progress on the Broomfield Town Square. The developer website does not have an update, and it appears funding has stalled. Can an update be given on those projects? I've given a brief update, but to be specific, we do have a web page on the city's website about each of these catalytic projects. We gave a quick overview of what the projects are, and then we link them to the developer's website. We update them when there's something that we can update about. So we don't update it with what we hear is coming or what is that, but if they say the day we're going to start construction is this day, it will be on our website. If they give an update to City Council, we put it on our website. So those links or those presentations from the developer are there. And so if right now on Broomfield Town Square, I would tell you, in working with that developer and in those conversations, they're doing a lot of that, what we refer to, it's terrible language, but I don't know another way to phrase it. It's called the due diligence and the pre-development work. So they're doing engineering drawings, they're going through a lot of the financing calculations and working with their bond counsel and others. They're working through their plans because they'll be submitting those. Once they get submitted, then that update will be put in to say that the plans have been submitted. So they've received their approvals up to a certain point, but they do not have their building permits yet. So that's where they are, is they're working through all of those documents. As you can imagine, a 4-acre lake, a public plaza, a redevelopment of a former grocery store, 3 new major residential and mixed-use buildings, 12 townhomes, all of that, along with at least 3 parking structures, is highly complicated and takes a lot of work, and that's where they're at right now. And so they have shared that with council. I believe it was I'm going to be wrong on this date, but I believe it was in April. And then they'll be doing an update on October 15th, is the next time they'll be doing an update with City Council, and we've scheduled that. So at this point, that's the status on Broomfield Town Square. They have indicated to us as late as just a week and a half ago that they expect to do their financing in 2025, and they expect to start some sort of horizontal construction in 2025 also. So I can only tell you what they're telling us, and I'm telling you exactly what they're telling us. So at that, those are the 2 questions that we got submitted before. Any questions?
I understand that often perception isn't reality, but often perception feels like reality. And so it appears that as we're adding all this density to the city of Broomfield, we're adding the density before the perception is before we have the infrastructure to handle it. And so it has become, over the last few years, frequently trying to move around in the city of Broomfield is like gridlock, and it almost becomes impossible. And for the longest period of time, in my opinion, traveling on Highway 7, because of all the additions that were done there, was even unsafe to drive. You couldn't see the lines, you couldn't see where the road was. And even today, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was gridlock in many places off of Highway 7 because of that increased density.
So I'll start a little bit of an answer. I don't know if Lynn wants to add anything, because she's probably a little bit more, but I'll start that while she comes up. If she wants to join in on the answer. So I will just say it from a personal perspective. I started with Broomfield 6 months before COVID. So I was experiencing that traffic as I was driving here from where I live. And honestly, it was a wonderful experience in some ways to be able to drive during COVID, because there's nobody on the roads. And so I got used to the roads being very open. My experience personally is in the last 3 to 6 months, it's 2019 all over again. The roads are full. We're talking US 36, we're talking all of these various roads. So we've seen that increase in capacity, in part because of behavior returning and people coming back to work and starting their normal lives again now that we're past all of that. At the same time, you're right, there has been development up on the Colorado 7 area. And so there's that. I will just add one other thing, and that is the Transportation 101 is just a little over a week away, and that's the perfect question to ask our colleagues on transportation. I'm not trying to buck out of it. I'm really not. But I also want to give Lynn an opportunity, because she can talk a little bit more about some of the infrastructure in Colorado 7.
So construction is disruptive, hands down, it can be. But as development comes in, we do plan for that infrastructure to be updated to accommodate the new construction. We're not going to have a new apartment building come in without having roads that are being built to accommodate those new apartment buildings, or the water pipes, the sewer pipes, all of those things, stormwater detention. We look at all of those things as part of the development review process, and we expect the developer to build those things to support their development. And that construction can be impactful. We regret that, but it is a fact. Our staff works very hard to try and minimize those impacts where we can. Notifying the public in advance, changing lanes, timing of traffic lights, if there are traffic lights out there. We do what we can to minimize that, but there will be disruptions during construction in order to facilitate the appropriate infrastructure to serve the new development.
And if I could just add one thing, and I didn't know if this is where you're going to go, so I didn't want to steal your thunder. In almost all these major developments, one of the requirements is they do a traffic study. The developer has to bring in and hire a traffic consultant who actually does the analysis to determine go ahead.
Yeah, we require, as part of the development review, we require a traffic study, a utility study, a drainage study, a geotechnical study, an environmental report. There's a myriad of reports, technical reports that we require and we review over the months, or usually months, less so weeks. Sometimes when there are master plan developments, they are reviewed early on, and then if you have a pad site come in with, say, a bank, that bank can provide a compliance letter that demonstrates how it complies, maybe the minimal improvements they need to do in order to fit into that bigger development. But for the big, broad developments, they do all need to provide these series of technical reports that are reviewed by our staff and by other agencies as well.
And I'll just do another plug for definitely the Transportation Forum. I think we'll have a lot of good information. So Sarah Grant, our Transportation Planning Manager, will be there, as well as our traffic engineer. And the reason I think that that's a great forum for that question is really because, especially with Colorado 7, it's not just due to Broomfield growth, but that's such a regional roadway. So Sarah Grant's work specifically advocating for Broomfield regionally with CDOT and with our partners, our regional partners, and planning for bus rapid transit and improvements to the overpass there at Colorado 7 and I-25. All of that is so critically important because we can't do it alone in Broomfield. We really do need the partnership with CDOT and others that are along that corridor. And so I think that she'll be talking about some of those improvements that are planned along that way, which hopefully, as takes time, as was said, but ultimately will be significant improvement over time.
Other questions?
I've got one for you. So adding on to your first question, one of the questions was regarding the pipeline, Jeff. Could you talk a little bit about Enhanced Broomfield and how that can help Broomfield's businesses that are growing within Broomfield?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, my work and my colleagues' work that I work specifically within economic vitality and development is both to encourage the right kinds of development that the businesses want and residents want to live in, because I also oversee the housing group, the housing development group, but also around filling those businesses and helping businesses grow. So we created close to a decade ago a program here in Broomfield called Enhanced Broomfield. I wasn't here at the time, so I can't take credit for any of that. Can take credit for how we've implemented it over the last few years, and really even that. It's a gentleman by the name of Jess Schreier who runs that program for us. But the Enhanced Broomfield program initially was set up to be what I sometimes refer to, and is referred to in the literature as broken window, which is to repair, to put new signs up, to repair parking lots, to repair facades. City Council adjusted that during COVID, where we provided direct support to keep businesses open. We felt that was in the best interest of the community, best interest of our businesses, and so we provided small grants, in some cases 2 times or more, but generally 2 times, to small businesses during the COVID. We did it very strongly in the first year, and then when it turned out that economic slowdown continued far beyond the first year, we came through again, City Council allocated additional funds for that. So we evolved the program to switching from what, was that facade improvement program and signage program into something that was more substantial to keeping and growing businesses. As the COVID pandemic went away and as the economic slowdown went away and we began to see the robust strength of our businesses again, we switched it a second time under City Council's direction, and we switched it over to be business support to grow businesses and to encourage new employment. And so that's where we've been for the last 2 years. That Enhanced Broomfield program for this year, the applications have been closed. The staff is now reviewing those applications, and we hope to finish that review shortly, at which point we'll let the businesses that we're going to make awards to come forward and receive those awards. So what this indicates in my mind is both the commitment of the City Council to grow our business community and also the recognition of both City Council and staff that what may have been needed 10 years ago needs to evolve to what we need today, and that continues to be that evolution of our economy and the evolution of how we support our businesses. So we don't just support small businesses that way. We do it primarily in some other forms, but that's one of our primary methods. We do try to support large businesses coming here because they build up that customer base for our small business, so B2B and other things. And then we also, as you noted, we support development. So our goal is to not put all of our eggs in one basket, but to create a very robust, vibrant, diversified economy. So thanks, Anna, for that question. Anyone else? If not, then we're going to close this out. This has been recorded. So for those who are watching this in a recording, you can see the QR code on this. You can also reach over and look at various parts of our websites to be able to reach out and ask other questions or learn more about any of these projects. Again, next Wednesday night is the Transportation Forum, and so we look forward to seeing you then if you have questions about transportation. But other than that, thank you very much for coming out tonight, and have a great evening. Thank you.